All right, today we're going to unpack one of the Bible's most talked about commands, the Sabbath. We're going to follow this thread all the way from the very first pages of Genesis through the Gospels and right into the prophecies of what's to come, just to see what the text itself really has to say.
You know, it's one of the 10 Commandments, but man, does it spark a lot of debate. So the big question is, what does the biblical record actually say about the Sabbath? For this explainer, we're just going to push aside all the later traditions for a minute and go straight to the source material to see what we find.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start at its origin and creation, then see what Jesus had to say, check in with the early church, and finally look at what the text says about its role way into the future.
Okay, let's kick things off at the very beginning. To really get a handle on the Sabbath, we have to go all the way back to Genesis, long before any laws were ever handed down on a mountain.
So right off the bat, the Bible ties the Sabbath's origin directly to the creation of the world. It's presented as being, woven into the very fabric of the planet. 6 days of work, and then a seventh day of rest that was uniquely blessed and made holy. What this means is that the seventh day had this special status from the very start. It was blessed and sanctified, which just means set apart, as a kind of pattern for everyone, long before the nation of Israel was even a thing.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit and see how this foundational idea becomes actual law. Centuries later, this concept from creation gets formally baked into the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai.
And what's so fascinating here is the wording. The command starts with remember. It's directly pointing back to the creation week. So it's not framed as some brand new rule, but as a memorial, a reminder of creation itself, based on God's own example. All right, this brings us to the most pivotal figure of all, Jesus. So how did he handle this ancient command? Did he get rid of it? Change it? Let's see what the source material shows us.
Well, the Gospels are pretty clear that observing the Sabbath was Jesus' regular habit. That little phrase, as was his custom, tells you this wasn't just a one-off thing. It was a consistent part of his life and his ministry.
And here, you've got Jesus clarifying his mission in his own words. He says point blank that he did not come to get rid of the law. And of course, that law includes the Sabbath commandment, a huge part of it.
So this shows us that Jesus' arguments weren't with the Sabbath command itself. They were with all the extra, restrictive human traditions that had been piled on top of it. He was working to restore its original point, to be a gift for people, a day for mercy and for doing good.
But this brings up a really common question. I mean, if Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, how does a typical Friday crucifixion timeline work? Well, the source material tackles this by pointing out a crucial detail about 2 different kinds of Sabbaths.
Okay, let's break this down, because the details here really matter. The key is that there were 2 Sabbaths that week. The Gospel of John mentions a high Sabbath, which was the annual Passover Sabbath. If that special Sabbath fell on a Thursday, it opens up the timeline for a Wednesday crucifixion. That would fulfill the 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, and it still honors the regular weekly Sabbath on Saturday, which is when the text says the women rested according to the commandment.
And it seems Jesus saw the Sabbath as being part of his followers' future too. In this prophecy about a time long after he was gone, he tells them to pray their escape won't be on the Sabbath, which really suggests he expected it to still be an important day for them.
So, what happened after Jesus' ascension? Did the first Christians just drop this practice? Let's jump into the book of Acts and see what the early church was actually doing. When you look at the book of Acts, you see a really consistent pattern. It was the Apostle Paul's custom to worship on the Sabbath, and he was preaching to both Jews and non-Jews on that day. At one point, you see whole cities gathering to hear him. And what's really telling is that there is no record in Acts of the Apostles ever teaching people to switch to a different day of worship.
And when you put the 2 days side by side in the New Testament, the differences are, well, they're pretty striking. The 7th day is consistently called the Sabbath. It's linked back to creation, and it's used for worship. But the first day of the week, it's never called the Sabbath, and there's no command anywhere to make it a day of rest or holy assembly.
This consistency really points to a key theological idea in the text, the Sabbath as this permanent sign of the relationship between God and his people.
I mean, the language here in Exodus is just unmistakable. It's called a lasting covenant for the generations to come and a sign forever. That Hebrew word for forever, olam, it means perpetual, with no end date attached.
And this whole idea of permanence brings us to our final section,
The biblical story suggests the Sabbath isn't just about the past. It actually plays a pretty big role in prophecies about the future. So the Sabbath works as this multi-layered sign. It's a weekly reminder of the Creator God, a mark of that covenant relationship, a memorial of redemption from slavery, and even an act of trusting that God will provide. But the story doesn't end there. The prophetic text suggests this sign isn't temporary at all, but is actually woven into the very fabric of God's eternal plan for the future.
And this, right here, is the capstone of the whole argument. This prophecy from Isaiah places Sabbath worship squarely in the new heavens and the new earth, with all mankind taking part. You can see how for anyone who sees the Sabbath as temporary, a prophecy like this presents a pretty significant challenge.
And so all of this leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. If the biblical story presents the Sabbath as starting at creation, being confirmed in the law, upheld by Jesus, practiced by the apostles, and prophesied to continue into eternity, then what is its significance for us today?